Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Kipp Morrill, and I am one of your hosts here for the Bluff Creek Project podcast. And as always, I'm joined by my good friend and fellow Squatcher of the Year. For what year was that, Tate?
What year for what again?
You were the Bigfooter of the Year
Every
in
every
Iowa,
year,
I think it
every
was.
year since I've been here.
Every year. Awesome. Tate, how you doing over there in lovely Iowa?
Just sipping down a beer. You know me.
That's a sounds like a perfect Sunday evening
It
activity.
definitely is.
So again, thanks for joining us, everybody, and keeping with our current theme, which is obviously we're trying to discuss what we can about the Bluff Creek project and the Bluff Creek film site in itself. And we are excited to have a probably one of the original before it was even known as the Bluff Creek Project. I think it was just a group of guys getting together trying to find this film site. And with that, welcome Ian Carton.
Thank you very much, Kipp. Great to be on with you guys. And
Well,
well, yeah.
Ian, I was going to say that you're not on Facebook. You're not as well known with the folks out there, but you have played such an enormous role and such a crucial role in the finding of the film site and have contributed so much. It just goes to show you, just because people aren't, and I'm using my finger quotes, online doesn't mean that they're not vital and important to what we're doing out there. And with that, Ian, if you could just give us kind of a brief biography and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and
Of course.
so everybody knows who you are.
Okay. Well, my background is in science, in teaching. I have a master's in biology, and most of a BS is in biology, and a master's. Most of a master's haven't finished it in education. And I do keep a low profile on the internet. You won't find me on social media. Uh, for years, the project has had great people who sort of spearhead that and basically act as lightning rods. The abuse that Stephen has taken over the years is more than I could take. Uh, but I am happy to connect with people who are seriously interested in Bigfoot in general, and of course the Patterson film and the film site in particular. Uh, so anyway, I was actually, I guess I was lived in Northern California and in Southern Oregon on the coast there between Eureka and California and Gold Beach in Oregon as a young child in the 70s when there was still very much Bigfoot in the mainstream media. Uh, and then I went back, or the family moved back to the East Coast, where I spent most of the rest of my life. And then, circa 2006, by happenstance, ended up out in Redding, California. And I had, of course, been online and following Bigfoot, and was fascinated to try to find the film site, even though, of course, all of Northern California is prime Sasquatch habitat, and you could just as likely see Bigfoot when you're driving to work one morning than climbing hours and hours up into the mountains. But yeah, I made my first trip, I guess, in late spring of 2006, and got as far up on the go road as you can before the snow blocked us. And it just kept following what was going on online, and visited several more times. And realized, like a lot of people, that so many people knew where the film site was in there, but all of that predated the modern era of GPS and smartphones and digital cameras. uh, I remember working from a trip report that had been published circa 2000 or 2001 by Todd Neese, well-known Bigfooter. He had met some people there at the film site, I believe Peter Byrne and Ron Moorhead and some others. And he had written about it at the time. I think it showed up on the old Bigfoot forums, and Bobby Short featured it in her newsletter. And he actually included some GPS coordinates, and those were some of the first that I had. And I plotted them out on the topographic maps, and then on Google Earth when that became available. It's like, wait a second, that doesn't seem perfectly right, but it's the best thing we've got. So a few years pass, and I guess thanks to a good interview or a good phone call and a few emails with Tom Yamarone, I get invited up to the Bigfoot Roundup in Yakima in spring of 2009. And that's where Stephen Struford and I meet. And we start talking about our shared obsession with not being able to locate exactly where the film site is. And of course, so many other people were there. Robert Leiterman was there that weekend, and although I don't remember meeting him. So Stephen and I started out early in the summer of 2009, and it may have been one of our first trips to the film site, because you could still get there on 12 and 13H. You could still get down to the area we call the bat boxes at that point. Our first trip down there, as we passed sort of the landslide area on some of our maps descriptions, you may hear it. We passed that area, and there's this black helicopter circling overhead.
A literal black helicopter.
Black helicopter. It's
not the proverbial black helicopter, but a actual black helicopter.
I didn't know. It was a black helicopter, and it didn't have any obvious markings.
With the notar.
Yeah. So it just seems like every time we went up there was some little quirk like that. And in that case, that was a film crew coming in to do some, I guess, more like B-roll footage, but they had some of the same people and same equipment they used for in the Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, where they recreated the Memorial Day footage on the side of a mountain there in Washington State, where you see a figure running across the hillside up above a campsite. And they came in with LiDAR surveying equipment and measured exactly what the distances were and all that. And they came and did the same kind of survey work there in the Bluff Creek Canyon, although not in the right place. But then, they didn't know any better than we did, or anyone else, I guess, except Cliff and Bobo. They were pretty much always right from the beginning. But anyway, there's always something like that. So that film crew, their show eventually aired, I guess, the next spring or summer on it's on National Geographic Channel. I forget what they called it. It was something like American Paranormal or something like that. It was just one episode of a series. I don't think it lasted very long, and they couldn't really use much of the footage because they acted like they'd found the film site, but they couldn't put anything together. They couldn't cite any landmarks, and of course they didn't give GPS coordinates to the viewers. It's strange that many of them don't on these TV shows, whereas our group has, as far as I know, always tried to be as transparent as possible with our data and, of course, our conclusions, and just try shutting us up. So that gets us to just before officially starting the Bluff Creek Project. And that would have been in early summer of the next year, 2010, where Stephen introduces me to Robert, because Robert wants to shoot video of going out and looking for the film site. And eventually we three become the Bluff Creek Film Site Project. And
that's just the three of you.
Exactly.
So at this point,
it's just the three.
You, Robert, and Steven.
Precisely. And that's early summer 2010. And we make several filming trips down there. And by spring of the next year, we've pretty much settled on the location. And of course, there's more people coming in. There's Rowdy, there's Jamie. Kipp came in and helped several events, and he passed away not too many years ago now. That's heaven. What Kipp's last name? Lytle, I believe. He had done a lot of Bigfooting over many years, and even taught a class on cryptozoology in community college. And I've seen him on TV a few times over the years. So anyway, there's a lot of people coming in and helping and continuing, as you know, continuing the project onward. So it's great to see that, and it's great that so much work continues to be done, like the camera project. That's particularly labor intensive and money intensive.
Yeah. So Rip passed away, it seems, October 5th of 2016, believe it or not. He was a young 61 years old.
Yeah, he certainly looked younger than that when
Yeah, that was quite a shock. I never met him, but I, of course, heard a lot of things. And the time that I finally met you was kind of an interesting one. I was there. It was pouring down rain the whole night, and myself and Rowdy and Daniel Perez were camped just across from the 12N 13H, the spur road that goes down to the berm, which eventually leads to the site. And I just remember we see this car coming along, and first of all, seeing a car out there in October in that weather, we thought, oh my gosh, well, I wonder what this is all about. And then I believe you walked up and introduced yourself. And so Rowdy, of course, knew you, but I had never met you before, heard your name, but didn't know you. So but it was really cool that you came out for the 50th. That was a big one.
That was a great trip, except for the weather. Those first couple of days. Oh boy.
Oh, you must have. I was there earlier that day with my dad, but we actually left. So I would have met you that day, but looks like I didn't get the chance.
Well,
and I believe you and Daniel stayed for like an extra day and camped at Beans Camp, I believe.
Precisely, yeah. Beans Camp is a favorite of mine. If I'm not there meeting a large group of people, just because it's out of the way. In fact, it's not on a couple of the maps. It's close to everything. But yeah, Daniel stayed there another day, and then he actually found some interesting tree breaks in the vicinity. And after he returned to work, I resupplied in Willow Creek and headed back out to that location for another 2 days to just take a look, document things, and enjoy it. The weather turned wonderful after the 20th. After that, rain, and there was actually snow on the go road on the way in that morning. Mm-hmm. But the next few days, I stayed out there alone at Beans Camp. It's beautiful fall weather for the area. It just shows you have to be prepared for anything out there, especially when you're at the shoulder seasons, late in the year.
Definitely. We went up there the year after, a fairly large group of us, and camped down there at Louse Camp. And we were blessed with some beautiful weather, but October in the Six Rivers, woke up to some frost and some ice, and down there in that hole, you're waiting for that sun to come up and eventually start to hopefully warm things.
Yeah.
But until that time, everybody's bundled up and in jackets, and it was beautiful, though. I mean, there's nothing like it. Anybody can see from the 1967 Patterson Gimlin film, just how some of the fall colors in the background. It's obviously it's a bluebird type of a day. It wasn't overcast or raining or anything like that. So they were actually pretty lucky to have the kind of weather that they had when they actually made the filming. So
yeah,
yes, I think the weather was definitely in their favor. Although, like with some of our visits, it turned on them, and they didn't need to retreat that night or the next morning. And I certainly understand that. I remember with Stephen and Robert, one trip down there, we only had the one 4-wheel drive vehicle with us on that trip. We didn't have anything else to pull ourselves out with. We got in trouble. It was one of the trips where it was raining, and yet Robert still managed to film it all. It was a combination of army poncho and an umbrella to keep the camera from getting. It was work that weekend.
I've been there a few times where everybody gets down to the film site and we're trying to maybe clean up a few spots so that we can do some filming or do some other types of research. And there's work to be done, and it takes work. And usually when there's a large group, there's the doers, and then there's the leaning on the handle watching the doers.
I'm the watcher. I'm a watcher.
Well, I have been incredibly impressed with the work that's been done there every time I've visited since 2012. And every time I get down there, I'm impressed that more underbrush has been cleared out, and there's still a good footpath or trail from the end of the road and the bat boxes to get you out to the film site with the minimum amount of jumping over and under logs and the stream, et cetera, et cetera. So you guys have been doing great work.
I've been pretty impressed and amazed, and hopefully I'm not going to, cause knock on wood, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But it's such a remote location, and it truly isn't an easy feat to get there. One parks at the berm, it's quite a hike down, and then a hike to it, and then of course for those that are not as experienced in the woods and not as physically fit, it can be quite a challenge to come back up that mile back to the berm and to get away. And with no cell coverage and other things, I think we've been quite fortunate that people have been relatively unscathed both going in and out. So always like to try and remind people that are thinking about going that to be very prepared, whether it's with extra food, water, fuel. Make sure you have plenty of fuel in your tank before you go up, right, Tate?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that there is no cell coverage, and definitely whether you're going up there as a maybe just for your first time, but let somebody know. Stop at the ranger station in Willow Creek, or stop at the store in Orleans. Just let somebody know that you're going up there so that somebody is aware. So just like to always throw that in.
But I can't agree enough. Every time I've visited that area, or at least every summer, sometime in the vicinity of my trip, there is some organized or semi-organized group going out there or talking about it. It might be a film crew. It might be when they were filming Willow Creek, or of course the crew that came in by helicopter. And it is one of my concerns that someone is going to get lost or hurt back up in there, and the support we've had from the Forest Service for people going back in there will evaporate if they have to mount a search and rescue operation. That's
right.
Who got into trouble, they should have known better too. But that being said, I'm not aware of any problems since they closed the road at its current location. The only scary thing I'd heard of was people sliding off of the road in their car, there at the landslide area.
Right, and now that's not to be worried.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
a rather challenging, treacherous walk for some to get past at this point.
Well,
It's just a
yeah,
narrow trail as it just the
well,
slide. So
it is getting hard to walk. And 10 years ago, you could still drive past that spot.
yeah, I can't. I think, wow, I can't even picture that. But yeah, like you said, people could drive all the way down to the bat box and
Well,
camp, and
or
it was just a
service.
short walk.
Yeah, it was much easier. Of course, we're not sure which direction they were going. I mean, once they got there, everyone was pretty sure about the bat box area that we talked to, and I guess at one point back in 2009 and 10, we were looking at, we're looking at least one, actually two possible spots for the film site being downstream of the bat boxes, to the left when you got down there, and two, maybe even three spots upstream or very close to the bat boxes and that clearing. So, yeah, and that was just, I don't know, straight line distance along the creek. That's just about half a mile. With all the places where the bank had failed and there'd been landslides, it was always possible that the exact film site was lost forever, or it was, outside of our sort of initial, search area. But I was very happy once I finally saw it. Once I was convinced, I was very happy with everyone's work and having the good eyes to spot the site where it was and see through the trees, see through all the undergrowth. And I remain to this day 100% convinced that we're definitely looking at the right Patterson-Gimlin film site, without a doubt.
I think that without a doubt, yeah, I think that, as you mentioned earlier, one of the things about the Bluff Creek Project has been transparency and the sharing of information. It goes a long ways, I think, with credibility, etc. And so I've got to ask you this question, Ian, as a scientist. We're all enthusiasts, but the big question is Patty the real deal? Is that a real breathing something, some sort of creature,
right?
Or is it somebody in a suit? What's your take?
Well, my scientific background is undergraduate level, and so I'm certainly no wildlife expert. If there is even an appropriate branch of science to discuss that, but I'll stop dancing around it and say, yes, I believe we're looking at an actual unknown hominoid. I believe the film is genuine. I accept that there are definite questions about the film's provenance. I mean, any of us who've driven back up in there wonder how on earth they filmed that Friday afternoon, did everything they said they did, and still managed to get out to the coast, to Eureka, and somehow get the film, sent back to Yakima to be developed. There's conflicting stories about that. It's, of course, unknown where the film was developed. You do have to remind people about that nowadays. People, 40 or younger forget, the ritual of sending your film off to be developed. Everything's been digital for half of their adult life, most of their adult life. But on the other hand, we know so much more from the film because there are 450 plus frames that each one can be, analyzed as an individual image, like a negative. Although this was a positive film, we're pretty certain. And anyway, that's just one of the many issues about the film's provenance. But in terms of what I see on it, uh, I don't know how it was faked. And I haven't seen anybody, even with vastly more resources than Roger and Bob had, come anywhere close
Yeah.
to, let alone faking it. They can't even describe convincingly how you would fake it. I mean, the costume seems to be, beyond anything that was possible then, and probably beyond anything that's possible now without using, like remote electronics in the suit to change the length of the limbs and provide the motion that you see, the muscle movements, and of course, the subject being female. Why on earth would anyone hoaxing it try to go to the difficulty of faking that? And quite realistically, Bill Munns has an extensive coverage of that in his book, When Roger Met Patty, which everyone should read if they're serious about the film. And he's by far the living expert on the issue, on the film. He's examined more copies of the film, spent more time on the film than anyone I've ever heard of.
So coming from the skeptic side, which is
Yes.
always interesting, this is what I hear. So you're going to tell me that two cowboys on an afternoon in October of 1967 took the absolute best film, the best film evidence that we have of a Bigfoot in the last 50 years, and that's what the Bigfooting world tends to hang its hat on. Is that what you're telling me, Kipp? And I say, well, kind of, maybe, but I know that it's hard to argue with sometimes that that's the best that we have, clear photographic evidence. And of course, in this day and age when things can be very easily CGI'd, very easily, if there may be something on YouTube or on the internet somewhere that is authentic, but trying to get through, pardon my saying this, but all the crap to get to what's good, it's hard. But right, am I right?
I couldn't put it much better myself.
Well, you think of how the year that was filmed was in '67. Planet of the Apes didn't come out till the following year. I mean, they were filming the movie in '67, and Jeff Meldrum always points to that one scene in the series of the sauna scene where you see all the apes in the sauna. And you got to think they had a lot of money to make costumes, even for the main characters of that movie. And that was with a lot of money, with Hollywood backing them. I can't imagine Roger Patterson or Bob Gimlin having that much money to make or pay for a suit to film something like that in '67.
Yeah, I've half joked with people that if the film was faked, when Roger needed money, which he always did, he should have just taken the film and the suit to Hollywood and used it as his portfolio and gotten a job with any of the best costume makers that there were, because no one else could do anything like that. And like with Planet of the Apes, I mean, 90% of the costume work there, the makeup work, was on the actors' faces and hands.
Yeah.
As in most of the scenes, the apes are wearing clothes. Whereas what we see in the Patterson film that defies, easy explanation of being a fake is the muscle movement, and as well as its just general size. I can't understand how people look at it and think that's obviously a person in a suit. The body motions, especially the muscles, the limb ratios, and just it's of course, it's unusual gait.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little harder to verify for yourself, just looking at the few publicly available copies of the film. I mean, besides YouTube, it's a little harder to verify for yourself, but enough experts take it seriously that I do too, and have to admit, in the few scenes, I guess you could say, where you can really see the feet and the lower leg movement, it does have an unusual gait that, you know, a person wouldn't naturally be walking in. So I don't know what else to tell people. It's the best visual evidence we have. And maybe there's other good stuff out there too, but it's hard to find it on YouTube.
we have a saying in wildland firefighting, which that's my career, but we talk about fire behavior models. And one of the things we have is fire behavior models are crap, but they're the best crap we've got. So we tend to go along with that. But, you know, if anybody has ever met, there just happens to be one man left on planet Earth who was there when it happened in 1967, and that is Mr. Bob Gimlin. And if anybody's had an opportunity to meet Mr. Gimlin, first of all, you're going to be struck by how incredibly generous and kind he is. But then you have to understand, he's been, I can't tell you how many conferences, campouts, events, and if he didn't believe that that was real, I think you'd know by now. But his story, it remains unchanged. And again, I think that people can get a genuine sense of who somebody is when you're around them. I know that I feel like I have a pretty good judge of people, and he's just about the most kind, genuine people that you're ever going to meet. He's always got time for people. Doesn't matter if it's kids or older people, younger people, men, women, whoever. He's just extremely gracious. He's such a kind man.
Uh-huh.
And there's something interesting going on right now, Ian, and I'd like to get your take on it. Somehow it's been drudged back up, but are you familiar with the M.K. Davis massacre theory?
Oh, yes, of course. So we were actually talking about that way back in 2009. At least we were talking about it on some of the early Bluff Creek videos, because I remember we specifically took pictures of some of the reflections of the fall foliage down in the reflected off of Bluff Creek, because one of MK's claims is that early frame of the film shows a bloody pool. It's
which is it looks more like maybe a particular reflection of a particular maple that's pretty common down there.
That was our assessment there, and there's also the issue that this is a physically developed film, color film, and the process for copying it is a physical process, and Munns and others have gone into this in his book and online, that there are different ways that you can copy the film, and it's going to lead to different colors, different intensities and brightnesses of colors, even just how fresh the chemicals were that were used in that development process. And different copies of the film have different color saturations, and also they may have aged differently too over the 50 some years. But the image that he was talking about was just been so heavily manipulated that it's impossible to see anything there, in my opinion. And it's certainly, it would have taken hundreds and hundreds of gallons of blood to turn the creek red. It's just it defies any common sense, let alone like analysis.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. It's just, of course, the internet's full of all kinds of lunacy and whatnot, but there's been this push to try and bring back this whole theory and some really mean accusations pointed at Bob Gimlin, which uh, infuriates me. It really angers a lot of people. He's certainly he's an old man. He's in his 80s. He's told his story. He stands by it, and it's just seems rather cruel that somebody would come up and try and pull all of this back out again. I think it's been well debunked. So yeah, that's interesting. I appreciate your insight and take on that. So Ian, when I know that you've moved to Virginia.
That is
Is that
correct.
correct?
Yes.
And are you engaged in any kind of Bigfoot activity, anything like that in Virginia while you're out there?
I am ready, but it's been a very quiet few years here. I've got my thermals, I've got my gear, I've got two 50-gallon or sorry, two 50-pound bags of one's dental stone and one's ultra cal, uh, ready for casting. But it's been very quiet. Most of my activity the past few years has been attending what events I can get to on the East Coast easily. I've also been a vendor at many of them. I collect Bigfoot books and other memorabilia and resell it sometimes when I basically it started out because I would get a copy of something and then I'd find a better copy, so I would pass on the first one I got to someone else. And eventually I decided to use it to try to pay some of my expenses. You know, gosh, when we were driving out to Willow Creek and then to the film site, most of those years, gas in California was pushing $4 a gallon, and you could spend $150 just on a weekend, just on gas, driving those back roads. Fortunately, it's a little bit better here now, but California will always be expensive fuel-wise.
It's expensive.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is. It's been it was interesting. I have a diesel pickup, and so paying $3.99 a gallon, and then moving across the border into Oregon and paying 50 cents a gallon less, or even less than that. So it's it's pretty rough.
Yeah, that was entirely my experience living in Redding, going up to Ashland. I mean, 50 cents a gallon just for crossing the border.
Yeah. So Ian, have you ever had any kind of something you couldn't explain? No. Interesting, kind of.
I've never, but I'm open-minded, and I've been an avid outdoorsman all my life since the Scouts. I have I've volunteered with trail maintenance crews here for the Appalachian Trail. I've been a search and rescue team member. And I'm out there, I'm listening, I'm trying to hear things, trying to find out if there is, a local tradition of sightings. Is there a local name? Is there a location? And no, I've been everywhere I've been. I've tried to listen and be open-minded, but I've been all up and down the East Coast and made years in California, a couple summers in Montana, South Dakota, and even multiple trips to Alaska. Everywhere I've been, everything I've seen, heard, smelt, sensed has all been in the field guides. And I just have to say specifically about camping at Louse Camp, Beans Camp, camping at the Bat Boxes, the film site. I've never felt concerned. I've never felt like I was being watched or spied on or in danger or anything. It felt like there was anything nearby, except for what we know about. And some of those Bluff Creek videos from the trail cams are pretty impressive with the size of the bears they see. And there was one video clip with, there's 3 mountain lions in it, or there's, you see the tail of the first mountain lion that trips the camera, and then you see probably her 2, year-old whatever cubs coming up into camera view after that. There's a lot of life around that place. But unfortunately, I don't have any direct personal knowledge or experiences. I'm out there though, as often as I can, trying.
Well, that's the best way to figure out if and I guess it comes down to this too. And I've had this conversation with a lot of different Bigfooters. Do you really want to have an encounter? I have to ask myself that sometimes. I think I do.
Well, one of the things about the Patterson film Tail that makes me do a gut check is, of course, Roger running after it across the creek. But another story is that, that night after they were back from shipping the film and meeting people in Willow Creek, and of course, doing a telephone interview with the local newspaper. When they were back at their campsite that night, when it started to rain, Bob went back up the creek that night alone to try to cover up the tracks to preserve them from the rain. And I'm not sure I would have had it in me to do it. I mean, when you've been absolutely proven that Sasquatch is real and it's there in the area, and remember earlier that summer, or actually I guess just in August and September, they had found 3 sets of tracks, or tracks of 3 different sizes, large, medium, which is supposedly Patty, and then small. So indicating there was a family group there. So there's multiple Sasquatch up there, and you've just proven it. Yeah, I'm not sure I would go up that creek alone at night.
Well, our good friend Robert has slept, by himself in a tent at the film site, and I will be honest, I don't think that I could do that. I would be extremely frightened to do something like that. I'm a tough firefighter, and it does, and life changes dramatically when that sun goes down. It's pretty intimidating.
It's a
certainly
whole
having
world.
Absolutely, and having a FLIR and having night vision, that's quite the game changer. But without those tools, it's certainly. And I'm going to bet that Bob didn't have a thermal or night vision to be able to walk up that creek. So, but he's an old cowboy. So
exactly, he's an old cowboy. But I'm impressed.
Well, sure he had a big old 30-30 rifle with him too.
Yeah, he had he's mentioned it. He had a bolt action hunting rifle, and Roger had one too. But he's also mentioned, when he was asked, he wasn't sure it would have stopped her if it had charged at him. And I can see. I mean, I've been close to brown bears in Alaska, which were well over 500 pounds, and maybe a couple of the big males were even pushing more than that. And you could shoot it straight through the heart, but it's still big and strong, and it could literally kill you falling on top of you. But I don't want to take things in that direction, because I'm thoroughly convinced that you're not in any danger from Bigfoot. The only things in the woods on two legs you need to worry about are other humans. And I'm just convinced that scary monsters sell books and sell movies, but it's just not reflected by the evidence that we have. If a person goes missing, there's a response. In the woods, in the outdoors. If I don't come back from a trip, people will start to raise the alarm. People will volunteer to go looking. There'll be aircraft if they're available. Whereas, here in the U.S., it's not actually a crime to just disappear from your daily life if you want to.
I think that's normal now when people do that.
I choose not to come home from work one day. If there's any response at all, it depends on, the police. But if I don't come back from a hunting or a camping trip, there will definitely be an official response. And people just aren't disappearing and getting injured or killed out in the woods by unknown sources. I don't think there's any danger at all from these animals. I say animals just because I don't have a better word.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because there are some, it seems as though a lot of the reports that come out of, let's just say, East Texas, Big Thicket, Louisiana. Of course, there's the Mike Woolley story, which just makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, where he is deer hunting and encounters two very aggressive, what he calls a Sasquatch or a feral human. And so I think there's a lot of people that have differing opinion than that. However,
I've certainly, and some of the oldest stories are of aggressive behaviors, violent behaviors, but there's so little tangible evidence of that. I have to also point out that just being the fact that you are absolutely terrified and scared to death doesn't mean that the creature has any ill will towards you.
True.
It's a perfectly natural behavior to be scared to death of something this big and strong and fast.
Well, would you, as a scientist, in order to have, and I tend to believe that the only way that we'll actually have proof, if that's what people want, in order to have that, it will take a biological specimen, and how that specimen's gathered. It depends on, if it's natural causes, vehicle, getting hit by a vehicle, or being shot by somebody. What's your take on that? And as a scientist, would you advocate for or against something like that?
Well, my formal science background is limited to high school science, so I'm going to equivocate a bit. Yes, first, absolutely a type specimen, a body is needed, and unfortunately, natural causes or road accidents just haven't provided one. So that means that someone is going to have to take one, shoot it, capture it. That would be even better. Just last week, I was talking with someone about the old Bigfoot trap in Southern Oregon that's been preserved by the Forest Service there. It's just south of Medford, not too far from the California border at the Applegate Reservoir Lake. And they tried that apparently for about 6 years, from 74 to 80. A group, I forget the name, now not in existence, kept it staffed. Kept raw meat in it, apparently, to try to attract a Bigfoot, to no effect, unfortunately. Short answer is, well, we need a type specimen, we need a body, but in real life, that's a lot to ask somebody to do, because in my opinion, I can't ethically shoot except in self-defense. And there's a very real issue of, you know, they're reliable sightings, you know, of these creatures being 12 feet or more tall. I mean, just going by the increase in volume, talking about, you know, half a ton, 1,200-pound animal. Like, they don't let us carry guns that could stop something like that in
Right.
one shot.
And it seems to be interesting to me that a lot of people who have had encounters or have seen these things, it seems like it becomes a quest to prove to others, I think oftentimes, maybe to themselves, but to prove to others that this exists and what I saw was real, and I'm not crazy.
Oh,
And I'd have to say that go ahead, Tate, I'm sorry.
No, I agree with that because I've had experiences, and I can kind of see where you're coming from because I kind of do the same thing.
And you know, selfishly, I think that for me, if I were to have an encounter, I think that would be enough for me to become, I guess, what they would call a knower versus a believer. And currently, I'm a believer, and I do have one of my cousins who had an encounter. She's the same age that I am, and she's in her early 50s, works in the medical industry. And when she talks about her experience, it's a very personal thing to her. And when she speaks about it, she gets very emotional. So it's had a profound effect on her and her life. And I think that there's probably, I would say that, and this is a wild ass guess, and I'm spitballing this, but I would say that we may hear about an encounter for every 10 that maybe are actually experienced, and people just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to seem crazy. But I think that
good number. Yeah.
I think it's a very profound experience. And I'm sure, Ian, you know, through your time meeting people and going about, you've experienced that.
Oh, absolutely. I would say that the person who is not deeply affected by a sighting is almost unknown. I mean, I remember speaking with one man at the Ohio conference who was rather matter of fact about it, but I mean, it's a profound experience. I mean, whatever your worldview is, I mean, from my perspective, you know, what do you do when you unequivocally see with your own eyes that something science says doesn't exist, obviously does exist, and it's right there in front of you. Aside from the oh my gosh, look at the size of that thing kind of reaction, like, you know, it's got to affect you, both, you know, emotionally and, you know, at the intellectual level, based on, you know, what your, you know, views about science are, your religion even. I mean, people have tried to, you know, relate stories of Sasquatch to our ancient myths and even, you know, stories of the Bible, and that could be potentially deeply troubling or not to somebody. It might confirm views they have, but I mean, to me, the biggest issue is, you know, we've got these thousands of people who are seeing something, and, you know, they don't necessarily know what to do with it, who to tell, how to process it. It's got to be deeply, deeply affecting in some way.
Well, like what you said, they're seeing things, they don't know who to tell, or even if they tell somebody, they don't know if they're going to think that they're crazy for telling them. And I've been in that situation, and it's not pleasant, but, you know, if you stick to your guns and just keep with your story, you know, what you saw, I think people will start to think that you're not crazy, but you're adamant and you believe what you saw, I guess, if that makes sense.
I think I understand, and I agree. You've got to, you know, say what you know and stick by it. There's a couple of examples I think of. There's one that's in a lot of the science books about an early researcher oh gosh, he was working on the genetics of corn, I think it was. And this was before DNA was known. This was like in the 1940s, I guess. And she observed behavior that, the theory said couldn't happen. Genes essentially were moving around in the DNA of the plants. They didn't know exactly how genes worked, and the DNA was the reason for it. But she reported her findings and went on with her life and career. And then it was decades later, after DNA was better understood, she actually ended up winning the Nobel Prize for the work. But she observed something that they didn't think happened, but she reported what she found. In that case, she had scientific documentation of it. But it's a story that's frequently in the science books, and I hope that there's a lot of other people who are going to live to see themselves vindicated about Sasquatch too.
Well, I think once you've been a Bigfoot enthusiast, and I count myself as more of an enthusiast than a researcher, but once you've been involved in being a Bigfoot enthusiast and or a Bigfoot researcher, I think that it is only a matter of time before you're immune to being called crazy. So I know that my experience has been, and I like to try and breach the subject a little bit by kind of letting somebody know, and I'll say, well, I have this hobby, and they'll say, oh, really? What is that? And I'll say, I'm an avid Bigfoot enthusiast, and I get one of two reactions, and then there's really no in between. It's either really, that's crazy, or it's, oh my gosh, I totally believe them. I believe in that. So it's never really an in between thing. But we've got a couple of things going on with the Bluff Creek Project with the film site. One of those is, and I'm not sure if you've seen this yet, Ian, but Jamie Wayne has put together an amazing atlas with information about the entire area with maps. And I'm not sure. Have you seen that?
No, I have not seen that yet.
It is incredible. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I believe he sent Daniel Perez kind of an advanced copy, but the whole idea is he's produced these with the intent of hopefully using it as a means to get some money so that we could get some more cameras and get some batteries and those types of things. So with a donation to the Bluff Creek Project, then they would get this atlas. And I think that the asking is like somewhere between $60 and $100. I just sent him $100 because I wanted to make sure that I got mine because it's that good. So
I think that atlas is a great idea, especially for anybody who wants to go to the film site.
Yeah,
and I think that Ian would probably be in one of the the advanced free copies, but you'll definitely have to talk to Jamie about that one, Ian.
I will get in touch with him. I had my own mini atlas of maps that you see in some of the early film site videos. Since it seemed like it was always raining, I had all the printouts I could get shoved into this plastic waterproof file folders kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know how much of it made it onto camera, but Stephen, Robert, and I are looking over those many times, holding them up, trying to match up the tree line or something.
Oh right.
That was just the things that I could piece together. Starting in the early 2000s, and there's so much more available now.
Well, another thing that we have for the Bluff Creek Project, I was able to get an interview with Bob Gimlin at the film site in front of the big tree.
Yes, Stephen mentioned that to me.
I don't think anybody else has an interview like that with Gimlin.
Yeah, I think that I don't think he had actually been back to that area ever.
Was it his
even when they were there with Finding Bigfoot? I don't think they actually took him.
I think I can't remember who I was talking to. I think they were at the film site, but when
I think they were there definitely.
They didn't have any prominent landmarks in frame.
That's what I think too.
And so that's when I interviewed Bob, I was like, I want to have Bob right in front of the big tree, because that's probably one of the most prominent landmarks you see in the original film. I was like, if I can get an interview with Bob right there, that'd be huge for us. And
so let me ask you this, Tate, is your movie available on YouTube? Is that something that you could put a link to for our listeners for the podcast?
Yeah, that's on YouTube, free. It's all about the Bluff Creek Project. It's for the Bluff Creek Project.
Could you put a link on our podcast? That would be great.
Yeah, I can do that for sure. I can, Ian, I'd love to send you a copy of that too.
Please go ahead. I haven't been back to the project's videos on YouTube in I guess it was probably last fall or before Christmas. But I did warn you guys at the beginning of this. I keep a very low internet profile,
which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, I've got
in this day and age,
I've got much thinner skin than Bob Gimlin and many other people who have been put through this absolute torture online. But like Stephen and of course Bill Munn's. I mean, some of the comments about Munn's work is just borders on violence, I guess. Just, the personal attacks on his character.
Yeah, there's enough crazy people out there. Unfortunately, it gives them a very anonymous place to be able to be cruel and vile. Really, I don't think the people would act quite the same way in person as they would. They feel so free to have their anonymity.
Not a chance.
Well, another interesting thing coming up, and I would hope that maybe we'll see Ian, is that the annual Bluff Creek Project campout is coming up in July. And like you mentioned earlier, you mentioned that we have this very open policy with sharing of information and those types of things. So this is open to anybody. Generally speaking, it's not a huge number of people, because it does take a lot of effort and time and money to get out someplace so remote. But it's going to be in July. It's going to be at Louse Camp. If we'll see how things go with all the social distancing, with all of the things that we're facing. But maybe Tate, you could just kind of give us a little rundown and a little breakdown on that.
So yeah, the camp out for July would be Friday. What day is Friday in July? I don't have a calendar in front of me. I think July 10th is. I think it's Friday. Sorry, it's a Friday. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's July 10th through July 12th, which is Sunday.
Got it.
It would be. It looks like July the 10th is a Friday and the 13th is a Monday.
Okay, so yeah, it's July 10th through the 12th. Louse Camp outside of Willow Creek, California. The annual Bluff Creek Project camp out that we do every year. We'll go up there, maintain the trail, get that cleared up so it's easier for people who go to visit the site in that time of year.
And if you just bring yourself, Tate will take care of the rest. He'll bring food and the beer, and everybody will be happy in the woods.
I might ask you to borrow some gas. It's a possibility.
Yes, you will.
Well,
so, Ian, does that sound like something you might be able to make?
I have been planning to, but something has always come up these past couple of summers, and this year I was all set to confirm to be out there. I actually wanted to spend about 2 weeks in Northern California, see some old non-Bigfoot friends, and do stuff. But yes, this current situation with the coronavirus does make me wonder if I'm going to have the free time and the extra entertainment budget to do it this year. But I was planning to before all of this happened. So I am looking forward to a trip out there as soon as I can. But I can't commit right now, unfortunately.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. I know that if I can make it, of course, being in the wildland fire business, July tends to be kind of a challenging month for me. But if I can, I think it would be fantastic if we could do a live show down at Louse Camp and kind of get some people. I don't know what you think, Tate. Does that sound like something we might consider?
I really want to. Like, I want to do a live podcast there. I think that'd be really unique. At the same time, it's loud there because of the creek. So I thought
that creek is unique, and the sound is everywhere, and
it's beautiful.
And I hear things. I hear stuff down there at Louse Camp. That creek, you swear that there was another conversation going on, 50 feet away from your conversation.
You wouldn't be the first.
Steven Streifert, like, dude, you're probably hearing things in the creek. I'm like, I've never heard a single thing from the creek. I don't know.
Well, I have, and you
sounds like people down there talking.
It really does. Of course, doing something live from the film site too, again, would be wonderful.
I think that'd be even better, personally.
Well, you can get further away from the creek there.
I was thinking, like, if the creek is too loud, Onion Lake would be a really great place. That's special.
Or Twin Lake.
Quiet. It's a good place.
Twin Lakes, or even right there at the berm would be a fantastic spot. Well,
you can do 5 or 10 shows there while you visit.
You certainly could.
Air them all.
Easily.
That's right. Well, I show a good hour into our show, and it's a Sunday evening, and so I just wanted to say, Ian, thank you so much for taking time out and giving us a little more historic perspective and looking back at what the Bluff Creek Project was before it became the Bluff Creek Project. And I hope to see you out there at Louse Camp in Bluff Creek this summer.
That'd be awesome. I would love it too.
I'm going to do everything I can to be there. And once again, let me thank you guys for having me on. And the problem is sometimes getting me to shut up about this stuff. There's probably more things I could think of to go drag it on another half an hour.
And if you're at Bluff Creek, we have the whole time to talk.
Great.
We will look forward to that. And with that, Tate, do you have anything else before we send off?
Other than that, thank you very much, Ian, for taking the time out of your day to come on and chat with us. And I hope you're doing well.
Thanks.
And with that, we are the Bluff Creek Project podcast. And thanks for listening. Take care, everybody.